Hi, everyone. This is Jeff Kroom. I'm a security architect and distinguished engineer with IBM. Been with IBM for 36 years, and most of that has been spent in the security space. I've been interested in this particular topic all the way back into high school, where I spent most of my afternoons in the lab doing hacking and trying to figure out how systems worked and how they would break and how you could defend against attacks and all of those kinds of things. So it's been a fascinating topic for me always, as long as I can remember, and I hope you'll find it to be so as well. So welcome to this course, and I hope you'll find it interesting. We're going to move on to the next slide, which refers to the challenge that we face currently in the cybersecurity space, and the challenges are significant. In fact, most of these challenges have been true for a long time, and I suspect will continue to be true for a long time moving forward, which is one of the things that makes this such an interesting space and such a good place to develop and spend your time developing skills in. So for instance, the threats continue to increase. That's been the case for as long as we've been interconnecting computers across the internet. The threats have continued to increase. There's no reason to think that that's going to change. There's an increasing incentive for the bad guys to try to hack. And why is that? Well, because more and more we're putting important information, valuable information, resources that have actual monetary worth on IT systems. So as the famous or infamous bank robber Willie Sutton was asked, why do you keep robbing banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Well, if Willie Sutton was robbing banks today, he'd probably be on IT systems and be a hacker, because that's where the money is. And it will continue to be the case. So the threats continue to increase. Systems gets more complex, which also increase the threat space and increase the size of the target that we place on these systems. The alerts that we get continue to increase. In other words, the notifications that people are attacking and doing certain techniques using different types of attack vectors, that continues to change and morph. We have some general themes that continue, but the details of the attacks will continuously change. Unfortunately, those things are good for the bad guys. For the good guys, the number of analysts is down, and I'm talking. You see a statistic down at the bottom of this slide in particular that talks about a skills shortage that we're projecting that by the year 2022 there will be 1.8 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs. Now that's a lot. Some people will argue and say, well, that number's exaggerated. So let's cut it in half. Let's say it's roughly 1 million, just in terms of round numbers. That's still a huge number. That means if you have the job recs to go out and get the skilled people, there are simply not enough skilled people. And we can't create cybersecurity experts fast enough to meet that demand. Now, you may watch this course. This is being recorded at one point in time, so anytime you put statistics like this out there, there's always a risk that in the future the odds are that the dynamics will be somewhat different. I suspect this is going to be a problem for us going forward. So we're going to need a lot more cybersecurity experts in the field to accomplish what we need to be able to accomplish. And they're going to need more and more knowledge. The knowledge that's required in order to deal with the more complex attacks continues to increase. And then, unfortunately, we have less and less time to work on these, because literally time is money when it comes to these attacks. The longer it takes you to respond, the more it will cost. The more data that gets leaked, the more damage that's done. And in some cases, when we're talking about compliance regulations like the Generalized Data Protection Regulation from Europe, GDPR, if you don't respond quickly enough and notify all the people that need to be notified of a breach, it will cost your company significant money as well in terms of fines. So all of those things taken together really come up to one inescapable conclusion, that we need more cybersecurity skilled individuals to help deal with the threat. And so what do these folks need to do on a regular basis? Well, if you're a SOC, by the way, is a Security Operations Center. So that's sort of the control center, the nerve center of where we receive the security information and event management information. That's the acronym you see there, SIM, that refers to bringing in all the alarms and security information into one place. So we need to be able to see those events on a console, see the incidents, which ones of them are important and which ones of them aren't. That's a huge part of the triage that goes on here. And in doing that triage, we have to decide, is this a real thing or not? If it is, then I need to do more investigation. If it's not, well, then I can move on. And maybe I want to classify it so that I don't waste time on those similar types of information and alarms that come in the future. So we're constantly wanting to tune this to our environment so that we don't waste time. We're productive with what we do. You want to be able to do the investigations. In some cases, that involves using all sorts of different security tools. You may have lots of different consoles, although we're more and more about trying to create an integrated whole so that we can bring in the information from the data layer, the operating system layer, the network layer, the application layer, the identity layer, bring all of those in an integrated way together. But in many cases, these indicators of compromise may occur on different systems, and we need to be able to bring them all together. So being able to be skilled at doing searches, doing investigations, having a curious mind that can go out and piece together all the different threads that we have into an integrated whole and start building a narrative around, okay, this happened and then that resulted in this, and then we had this happen, and now what we have is not a single incident, but we have a large malware campaign, for instance, that is affecting lots of systems. And the way we mitigate and orchestrate our response to that then will become the next skill that we really have to focus on. So first job is identifying the problem, then trying to discover the extent of that, the risk that's involved in it, for instance, how big of an impact does this have on the organization, and then ultimately, what kind of response do we do with this? Can we automate some of the response for the future? Is this something that we will have to deal as a one-off? Are there individuals that we need to notify to get response to this particular problem? Do we have to work with other partners whose systems may be connected to ours? Our ISP upstream, do we need to have them put blocks on the network to get rid of the bad stuff? Do we need to install new tools that can help us do mitigations in the future? So you can see there's a lot of different kinds of things, and I've only touched the tip of the iceberg. But again, I'll say to you, I think this is a fascinating area. It's one that is constantly moving. If you like a challenge, if you like hard problems, this is a good place to work. And I hope you find this information in this course useful.
As you just heard in Jeff's welcome to this course, skills in cybersecurity are in high demand. Companies, organizations, and government agencies around the world are finding it very difficult to hire the number of skilled cybersecurity professionals to meet their demand. Hi, I'm Terry Puckett, a content strategist and instructional designer here at IBM Security. I will be with you throughout your journey to help tie together the material you will need to master in order to be successful in today's cybersecurity marketplace. You will be hearing from IBM subject matter experts who have a global perspective on cybersecurity challenges facing analysts today. They will provide you with information to meet the learning objectives for each of the modules in this course. In Module 1, Kenneth Gonzalez, a penetration tester in Costa Rica from IBM's X-Force Red team, will start you off with a brief history of cybersecurity. John McLaughlin, an executive security architect focused on U.S. federal government projects, will further explain why cybersecurity has become such a challenge in today's world. Kristen Dahl, a security consultant with IBM X-Force, will talk about critical thinking, the first of many soft skills introduced in this program. Kristen's video is borrowed from a web seminar she presented to an IBM chapter of WESIS, Women in Cybersecurity. In fact, joining a cybersecurity organization is a great way to learn from like-minded people of all skill and experience levels. There is a link to WESIS and similar organizations noted throughout this course. So with that, let's get started.
In this video, you will learn to describe the NIST, or National Institute of Standards and Technology, definition of cybersecurity. Describe the CIA triad and its components.
Information security. According to NIST, it is the protection of information systems from unauthorized activities in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three principles are known as the CIA triad. The CIA triad. Here we have three different principles. Confidentiality, which is similar or equivalent to privacy. For confidentiality, access to resources or data must be restricted to only authorized subjects or entities. Data encryption is a common method of ensuring confidentiality. Integrity, on the other hand, involves maintaining the consistency and accuracy of data over its entire life cycle. Data must not be changed in transit. For example, when it is sent over the internet or using a local area network. And steps must be taken to ensure that no one or an authorized person or subject makes any changes to our data. So it cannot be altered by unauthorized people. It is very common to use hash values for data integrity verification. Like, for example, when you download a new operating system from the internet, one of the first things to do once the download is ready is to compare the hash values that are provided by the author of the operating system and the hash value of the downloaded file. They must match to make sure that the integrity is accurate. Then we have availability. Ensuring availability requires maintenance and upgrading of hardware and software and operating system environments. So basically it is about keeping the business operations up and running. Firewalls, proxies, computers, everything has to be up and running 24/7, 365 days. Now, business continuity plans, disaster recovery, redundancy, all those are best practices considered for availability to guarantee that the business is always running.
In this video, you will learn to describe what these four key terms mean in the context of cybersecurity: vulnerability, threat, exploit, risk.
In this section, we will review four key terms: vulnerability, threat, exploit, and risk. A vulnerability is a flaw, loophole, oversight, or error that can be exploited to violate system security policies. For example, a software or an application that has code vulnerable to a buffer overflow exploit. Threat is an event, natural or man-made, able to cause negative impact to an organization. It could be a storm or a hurricane or a hacker, for instance. An exploit is a defined way to breach the security of an IT system through a vulnerability. Like the buffer overflow example that I gave you before, an exploit could be a piece of code available on the internet to execute such attack against an application that happens to be vulnerable. And a risk is the probability of an event, or that an event could actually happen. In this case, the likelihood of a vulnerability to be exploited.
In this video, you will learn to describe the categories of human factor and natural factor security threats.
Continuing with the security threats, now we have this specific tree that explains a bit more about different categories that we have for human factors and natural factors. Basically, we have internal factors and external threats. For the internal factors, we have former employees and current employees. This is very important because most of the attacks that are actually detected or that are critical for an organization come from internal factors like internal employees. Also, former employees are a threat because they used to have access to internal resources. So if they are not properly offboarded and the accounts are not properly disabled, then they will represent a threat for the organization. They also have knowledge about how the organization works, how the internals are executed. So they certainly represent a huge factor. Then we have the external threats. We have malicious events, for instance, an attack coming from a specific country targeting one of our DMZ servers, hackers or crackers. These guys who try to exploit vulnerabilities, they try to find a way to get in, and viruses, trojans, or worms, which are just different attack vectors to compromise an organization. All these are human factors because they either interact with humans or they are developed by humans. For instance, a virus is developed by a hacker to take advantage of a specific user, but also a user in a not negative or harmful way get access to something that compromised the system with a virus. Also, we have the natural factors like lightning, hurricanes, tornado, tsunami. All those are important to consider, especially when we design business continuity plans and disaster recovery strategies.
In this video, you will learn to describe a vulnerability assessment and its components.
A vulnerability assessment is the process of identifying, analyzing, and ranking vulnerabilities in a specific environment. Basically, a tool is used, for instance, to analyze a specific asset, identify the associated vulnerabilities, and rank each vulnerability according to a specific criteria, whether the vulnerability can be exploitable in the wild, if it is a null vulnerability, and many other parameters can be considered. Now, there are 2 points to take into consideration. Many systems are shipped with known and unknown security holes and bugs, for instance. This is also associated with misconfigurations, like when you get a modem and this modem has for instance, the username and password admin. This could be considered a vulnerability, since a hacker from the internet or a threat actor could actually connect to the modem and use those user account or those credentials to access the modem and perform any malicious activity. So the vulnerability assessment tool will be able to detect that this modem has the default credentials and will flag that as a misconfiguration vulnerability, so the system admin can actually go ahead and make the necessary actions or take the necessary actions to fix the vulnerability. In this case, change the username and the password, or change the password to something more or stronger, so it will be more difficult to get access to the modem.
In this video, you will learn to describe the various roles typical to a cybersecurity organization.
Roles in information security. Even though this is not the complete list of roles, because each organization may have specific roles for different information security areas. These are very common roles that you can find in large organizations, like the Chief Information Security Officer, which is a, we can say, fairly new role, introduced to make sure that there's a head and someone in charge of the information security division to supervise, manage, and be the leader of the information security tower. Now, then we have the information security architect, information security consultant specialist, information security analyst, security auditor, security software developer, the penetration tester, which is also known as a member of the red team, a vulnerability assessor. We also have the digital forensic analyst, who is part of a blue team, for instance. We also have the SEM, the engineer, the person who is familiar with different SEM technologies. So all these roles are very important, and if you notice, they already existed in the IT realm, but however, we are now adding the security portion to these roles to make them more specific and make sure that they are security oriented. So they make sure that they guarantee that the organization follows security best practices and standards. To mention a few of the roles, we have the Chief Information Security Officer. As mentioned before, this is a high-level management position. This is the head of the security department and staff. Okay, so this person is responsible for supervising the entire security department, and it's a very important role that in the past was not very common, but it is now very common to see this specific position or this specific role in organizations. Now, the information security analyst is more of a day-to-day analyst. This person is in charge of analyzing events, alerts, alarms, and any information that could be useful to identify any threats. So this person should be able to verify, for instance, or analyze events that are collected by a SIEM, like I don't know, maybe Curator, ArcSight, Splunk, for instance, be able to understand and investigate alerts from these specific SIEM platforms or any alarms related to, any health check of a specific device, anything that could actually lead to a potential threat. For instance, if an IPS is sending a threat alert to the SIEM, an information security analyst should be able to go to the SIEM, get the alert, investigate the events, and even go to the IPS to understand what exactly triggered it and be able to follow up on that to a resolution. The information security auditor, on the other hand, is in charge of testing the effectiveness of computer information systems to make sure that they follow best practices, they follow standards, specific regulations like the ISO 27001 or 002, for instance, that they follow at least the best practices defined in those regulations, and that organizations are as protected as possible.
In this video, you will learn to describe how the movie War Games spurred U.S. President Ronald Reagan to create the first national policy on cybersecurity, describe how 9/11 and the increasing use of computers and smartphones has impacted the need for robust cybersecurity.
So how this cybersecurity process start, how the governments involved or how they start into the cybersecurity arena. Everything starts with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a United States president that also was a Hollywood actor, and he asked to their security personnel, to their security advisors, if something that he saw on a movie could be real. What movie? Let's take a quick look into the movie that Reagan saw, and he asked to their advisors.
We're in. It thinks I'm Falcon. Hello.
How can it ask you that?
It'll ask you whatever it's programmed to ask you. You want to hear it talk?
Yeah.
I'll ask it how it feels. I'm fine. How are you?
Excellent. It's been a long time. Can you explain the removal of your user account on June 23rd, 1973?
They must have told it he died. People sometimes make mistakes.
Yes, they do.
How can it talk?
It's not a real voice. This box just interprets signals from the computer and turns them into sound.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
So that movie was War Games. It's a pretty old movie actually. But the main argument of the movie was that someone, actually that teenager, hacked into a computer into the Pentagon and start a game with the computer, the main computer of the Pentagon, the artificial intelligence that runs that computer understand that this is a war game, but it could or actually use the real missiles and the real nuclear arsenal. So a teenager from their home office, from their basement, hack into a computer into the Pentagon and take the ownership of the missiles from their home. So Ronald Reagan asked to their advisors, this could be real, this could be happening right now. So they start working on something. They actually work on the first policy for the cybersecurity field in United States that it's called the National Policy of Telecommunication and Automated Information Systems Security, NSDD 155. Then we jump to the 9/11. As soon as the 9/11 happened, a lot of people into the U.S. government start asking, how can we avoid the next 9/11? How can we avoid the next cyber threat that will cause an interruption of, for example, the lighting system, power plants, energy system on the United States field? And the last part of this history class is the use of technology. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, nobody has a computer in the house. Right now, everyone has at least a computer and at least one cell phone, one smartphone on their house. So there is a lot of people, there is a lot of technology over there, and there is a lot of information that could be shared, could be stolen, and could be compromised using that technology.
In this video, you will learn to describe the second major factor that contributed to the rise of cybersecurity attention in the U.S.
The next step, or the next big thing that happens that changed almost everything for the last 20 years was the 9/11. The 9/11 obviously was something physical, was a couple of planes that crashed into the Twin Towers in New York. But one of the things that the U.S. government tried to understand also was, first of all, how this could happen, how the coordination between different parts happens, and what happened if there is a 9/11, but not necessarily on the physical world, but on the technology. Something like the destruction of the power plant, or the destruction of the electricity network, or the power network into, or in any major or important city. And one of the important things to keep an eye on right now, it's the use of technology for almost anyone. So basically anyone right now has a cell phone. Anyone can access data, anyone can upload and download data from the internet. And we are going to talk about this specific topic in a couple of minutes. But that's something all important to understand. We have access to the technology. In those years, in the Reagan years, not everybody has access to that technology. But right now, anyone could actually start an attack using their cell phone, using their computer in their home. So that's something important also to understand, the use of technology. Here we have some nice early operations regarding cybersecurity in the nation states, or a cyber war to be specific. One nice operation was the Clippership operation developed by the NSA. And in simple words, this operation was something that those guys in the NSA tried to incorporate, like a chip into any landline for the for phones in most of the U.S. Homes, to try to spy their communications. Obviously, that project, that operation, didn't go well, didn't receive any approval from the Congress. But since the last leaks from Edward Snowden, we already know that, well, it's not Clippership, the operation that goes into operation. It was something different that catch not just communications over the landlines, but also communications over emails and over other communication methods. Moonlight Maze was an operation, actually, that's pretty important to understand. In the year 2000, Newsweek report created a series of reports regarding the Moon Maze story. In simple words, this Moon Maze operation was the process to collect or dump passwords from Unix and Linux servers, not just from the NSA, but also from the NASA, the Department of Defense, and a couple of other organizations in the United States. This operation was one of the first things that happened on the cybersecurity warfare arena, because, well, at this moment there is no indicator, or there is no real accusation for a nation or for someone in another country that performed this attack. But it's supposed to be the Russians that performed this operation. And the tool that they used to launch this attack was something called Lucky 2. And one particular thing that happened with this operation is the attackers use a lot of proxies. So they infect computers around the world, especially in the United States, and they hide their real connection using those computers. So when they start, when the U.S. government start looking and monitoring the unauthorized access and the activities on those networks, on the NSA, on the NASA, on the Department of Defense networks, they collect information not from the real attackers. They collect information from the proxies that the attackers are actually using. Another operation, the Solar Sunrise. This operation is important. But this operation has one interesting component here. First of all, this operation was a series of attacks to the Department of Defense computer networks. It launched on February of '98, and essentially they exploit a known vulnerability on one operative system on the network of the Department of Defense, and they start the attack following a series of steps. Actually, that's part of the interesting part of the operation. They try to determine or understand if the vulnerability that the attacker wants to exploit exists on the network. If the vulnerability exists, they exploit the vulnerability. They implant in a program like a backdoor or a sniffer to gather data or to get information from the network. And they actually leave the backdoor and the sniffer there, and return later to retrieve the collated data. The attackers launch not just this attack for the Department of Defense network, but also for the Air Force, Navy, the Marine Corps, and also in other countries such as Israel, France, Germany, and they target some of the key parts of the network. They try to dump also passwords and documents from the technological or from the infrastructure on the infrastructure on the networks that they attack. But the interesting part here is who launched this attack. It was something, I don't know, maybe the terrorists, maybe a rogue state such as Iraq or something like that. Well, no. Actually, the attack was launched by two teenagers from California, and actually one of the teenagers was from Israel. So this is a good example of things that could happen even if we are not dealing with the nation state cyber command, and what things could happen if we do not secure our network. And the Bushot Yankee was categorized as the most significant breach of the U.S. military computers ever by the Secretary of Defense William J. Lynn. And this operation was part of a series of compromises on the year 2008, and then everything starts with a USB drive inserted into a computer in the Middle East military-based operation. They use a Trojan called Agent BTC, and the Trojan, the worm, keep or stay on the network for 14 months until the IT security staff from the military clean the infection. No one at this moment has attributed the attack. It seems like it's from China, but there is no real accusation right now on the courts. So that's one important and major security breach and security operation or cyber warfare operation from the last 10 to 15 years. Then we have some other examples. Desert Storm operation on the early 90s and the Bosnia War. Those two are actually wars, are not necessarily cyber wars, but there is a component for the cyber war there. For example, on the Desert Storm, some of the radars that Saddam Hussein used to try to alert their military forces that airplanes are coming to destroy bases or things like that. Some of the radars are destroyed or are tampered with fake information. So that's one of the things that the U.S. military command used to successfully attack some of the key military buildings or Saddam Hussein. And from Bosnia, there was a lot of cyber operations, but things like, for example, fake news, fake information delivered to militaries in the field, things like that was used in Bosnia.
In this video, you will learn to describe how cyber vulnerabilities after 9/11 have been weaponized by governments and exploited by criminals, and how rapidly the problem is growing as our reliance on the digital world continues to increase.
A couple of other things, especially for the 9/11, the important part here to understand is the new Freedom Act was the key part to start the mass surveillance programs that Edward Snowden revealed a couple of years ago. And this attack, the 9/11, was the cornerstone to start the new cyber war, the new cyber arena war. That, for example, we're not going to talk a lot about that, but there is an attack called, or a virus actually called the Stuxnet, that was delivered into the Iran nuclear plants, and that process, that virus, that Trojan, was created supposedly by United States and Israel using one operation called Olympic Games, but that kind of things happen because 9/11, because United States or the U.S. government wants to not just understand what is happening into the cyber world, but also prevent and try to stop wars in the real world doing things on the cyber first. So that's the Stuxnet was an example of that. Here are some numbers. I think that it's important to understand cybersecurity numbers. Here is 2017 numbers. Obviously, since we have the report for 2017, the numbers that we have on that report are from 2016, sorry. So basically, we have a lot of software vulnerabilities. We have things like, for example, cross-site scripting. We have SQL injections. We have local file privilege, or we have privilege escalations on software. We have local and remote file uploads that goes or try to create access or backdoors into the systems. So year by year, we have an exponential increase of that software vulnerabilities. Even if companies try harder to fix those vulnerabilities, detect and correct those vulnerabilities, we have a lot of vulnerabilities in software. Actually, we are going to see a couple of new slides on the new Export Threat Intelligence Index report that we have for this year. Also, some numbers. Those numbers came from Forbes, and a study that Forbes developed on the year 2016. For cyber attacks, we have almost 400 billions of losses on yearly basis around the globe. So between the denial of service, between data leak, between nation-state attacks, there is a lot of money lost in cyber attacks. The cybercrime is a 100 billion business only in the United States. There is a lot of money on the cyber war, and the cybercrime is trying to take advantage of the use of or not use of protections for the users that actually goes into the internet and tries or buys things or perform things on their computers. And data lost, 2.1 billions on this year. That's the projection that Forbes generate on 2016. And for the Export Threat Intelligence Index, here is a link to download the latest report. But let's take a look into the report. Let's take a look into the first report for this year. Let's go to page number 16. This report is actually pretty good, so I recommend it. I recommend this report for actually everybody that wants to understand the current cybersecurity status of the year or quarter or something. So first of all, we have the most frequently targeted industries in 2018. Obviously, we have finance and insurance. Why? Obviously, because there is a lot of money there. There is a lot of people that not necessarily protect their accounts or their systems into the financial and insurance world. But there is a couple of other interesting industries also. For example, the healthcare. We have 6% of the targets was healthcare institutions in 2018. We have energy. That's something important because with Ukraine, in a couple of minutes, we are going to talk about one example in Ukraine. But there is a lot of malware, a lot of tools that the hackers use to target energy industries or energy infrastructure. So that's something important. Let's go to page number 23. On 23, we are going to see the same numbers that we saw regarding vulnerabilities over the year, but with the update for 2018. So we have a pretty huge increase in the number of vulnerabilities. And that's something obvious because normally when in the past we use a couple of systems. We don't actually use, for example, 15 years ago, we don't use Twitter, we don't use Instagram, we don't use web application, we don't use mobile applications. But now we use a lot. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of systems, a lot of platforms on our smartphones. So if we have a software, if we have an application in our smartphone, in our computer, there is a chance that application, that software may came with a lot of vulnerabilities. Not necessarily discover vulnerabilities or things that the attackers already know, but there is a big chance that those applications came with a lot of bugs and a lot of things to be worried about. And the last one on page 28, We have the malicious domain categories categorized blocked by Quad 9. A lot of URLs that are blocked right now in our systems, in our infrastructure, and our UTMs or firewalls are related to spam. So we have a 77% of URLs are spam, but there are also a lot of cybercrime, a lot of computer crime and hacking, 88%. Then we have 5% for malware and phishing, and 4% for botnet command and control servers. We are going to talk about each of those topics in the following videos on this course. So on that, there is a lot of information on this report. I highly recommend that you download and read the report. Almost 35 page of report. So that's good information. That's something important to understand.
In this video, you will learn to describe why comprehensive cybersecurity architecture can be very complex to implement in reality.
So let's talk now about how the internet works and why the online security is so hard to implement and to maintain. First, it's important to understand what is the current picture that we are having on our online presence. This is a report, summary actually of the report presented by Domo on 2018. And here we could see that there is almost, for example, nearly 25,000 GIF are sent on Facebook Messenger. That's a curious fact. Actually, there is a lot of tweets, almost 423,000 tweets are sent on Twitter, and 4.2 million or videos are viewed on Snapchat. Why those numbers are important? These numbers represents that everyone that has a smartphone, that has a computer, are on the internet, are sending and receiving information from not just web servers, but from another people in the internet. So those numbers, the interesting part here is those numbers are minute numbers. So every minute, 4.2 million of videos are seen on Snapchat. Every minute, 25,000 GIF are sent into Facebook. So there is a lot of data. There is a lot of information that we are using, and we are dealing with internet right now. Quick example, and something that it's a nice exercise to perform. The TUM, it's an organization that collects and understand data around the world. They try to analyze data using big data technologies and artificial intelligence and things like that. They put together a site where you can calculate how much or what is the cost of your information over the internet. For example, with a couple of clicks, saying, for example, that you have a Facebook page, that you normally send tweets, that you receive, or you have a personal blog on WordPress or something like that, we can estimate that the information that you already have on the internet costs almost $1,000. So that's something important, because normally we don't actually pay attention to the information that we share or we have on the internet. And that's one of the things that we need to understand in order to implement controls on our accounts. We're going to talk about authentication. We're going to talk about identification and the methods that we could use to protect our information, not just on the business side, but also in our personal digital life. So that's something important. We need to understand the amount of money that we're putting into in the table for the attackers, for the cybercrime to exploit, to capture. Now, what is so difficult? What is so difficult to implement, to understand, and to keep track of internet security or internet privacy on these days? Well, first of all, we need to care about data protection, and that's something important. But in the past, if we want to protect the data, we protect the server, we protect the computer, We protect our printed documents into and lock them into a box or something like that. Right now, we actually need to protect not just the computer. We need to protect our tablet. We need to protect our smartphone. We need to protect our smartwatch. We have a lot of devices, and those devices carry the information that we share, that we care, and the paradigm must be changed. We don't need to protect right now the asset. We need to protect the data on the asset. The asset is something important also, but we should care about the data. We shouldn't care about the asset. Then we have mobile technology. There is a lot of mobile right now. We have 4G networks that practically that mimics the speeds, or actually is improve the speed of Wi-Fi in some businesses or houses. And we have cell phones. We have actually most of the people right now are using their cell phones, their tablets, and try to replace that their computers with that. And again, we need to protect the devices, but we need to protect the confidential data on that device. We need to be sure that that devices are secure with authentication methods that will increase or will have enough control mechanisms to protect the data that a mobile device is carry on. We're dealing now with global businesses. We are not dealing with a single office or the single headquarters in one city, and that's all. We are dealing with a lot of offices and a lot of places in the world. So we need to protect each of those buildings, each of those businesses, the communication between those businesses, those offices, the data transportation between those enterprises and those offices from the same company should be protected, and that's difficult. We need to understand not just the technical stuff, but also the administrative stuff. For example, policies in countries, compliance in countries, things like that are difficult to keep track on. And last, we have multiple vendors. In the past, we deal with, for example, Lenovo. We deal with Dell, with Asus to buy computers, buy servers, and that's it. Then we have providers or vendors that will give us routers, network equipment, things like that. And then we have our ISP to give us internet access. But right now we're dealing not just with one vendor, we're dealing with multiple vendors on computers. It's something common that we go into any office and we see not just PCs but also Macs. We see computers with Windows but also with Linux. So there is a lot of vendors there. We are dealing right now with cloud computing. Cloud computing is a key part of the expansion of the technology, but also there is a lot of vendors, there is a lot of technology there, and we need to understand those technologies in order to protect the infrastructure that we are implementing or we are having on our companies, on our personal life.
In this video, you will learn to describe what considerations must be taken into account to start a cybersecurity program.
An approach where we could start on the cybersecurity arena. So first of all, we need to have a security program. We need to evaluate, we need to identify, we need to understand the risk, the threats that we are dealing with. We need to assess, monitor, and control those risks and those threats. Then we have to manage the assets. And by assets, I don't mean the computer that you have in front of, or your cell phone, or your share, but I mean documents, I mean systems. Each document that you have on your computer should be an asset. It should be managed with classification, with controls, with confidentiality, with integrity, with availability. Those terms will be, we will explore those terms in a couple of minutes in the next videos. Then we need to implement not just technical controls, for example, network infrastructure, servers, protection endpoints, vulnerability management, UTMs, firewalls, but also we need to implement administrative controls, for example, policies, procedures, incident response teams, disaster recovery procedures, compliance, and physical security also it's important. So Here is just a quick example of the things that we need to implement in our company, in our digital life. But there is a lot of things that we need to implement also. So we are going to explore those in next videos.
In this video, you will learn to describe who are the primary actors in cybercrime and what are the motives of each.
So, what is security? Within the principles of security, you frequently will hear about CIA, and that talks about confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. So it's actually a little wider than that, right? So confidentiality is a major principle, and this is where only the sender and the receiver can understand the message. So if it is intercepted midway, we'll take a look at some diagrams with that those interceptors will not be able to understand the message. So fundamentally, the sender, which would be Bob, right, in the literature, sends the encrypted message, and Alice, on the other end, receives and decrypts the message. Associated with this is authentication, where the two senders, Alice and Bob, in our example, need to confirm the identity of each other before sending a message. Equally important for authentication is integrity, that the sender and receiver, Alice and Bob, want to have some assurances that the message has not been changed, right? Whether this is going to be in transit or whether it's going to be in some intermediate stage on the receiver's end. Most importantly, has it been changed? And they want to be able to ascertain if it's been changed without detection. We will look at several mechanisms for that to happen. Last is the access and availability, right? So that the security services, the IT services that are available in the enterprise have the correct access control mechanisms in place and also have significant availability to allow the enterprise to operate according to spec. I am a big fan of Sun Tzu. The art of war teaches us not to rely on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but our own readiness to receive him. Not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. So this speaks to that principle of, well, it couldn't happen to me. Largely, you need to be ready. A follow-on to this, the combination of space, time, and strength that must be considered as the basic elements of this theory of defense makes this a fairly complicated matter. Consequently, it's not easy to find a fixed point of departure, right? So security is a complex field that's dynamic and changing. Before we jump into the dynamics and the interaction with cryptography, let's take a look at the playing field so that we can get the lexicon, the terms defined, and the actors. Well, so Alice, Bob, and Trudy, you see this throughout cryptography literature. And so it's A, B, and T are the actors, but back in the 60s, in a few papers, these were given names, Alice, Bob, and Trudy, and they continue today. So Bob and Alice, right, want to communicate securely. It can be for any reason, a personal reason or a business reason. Trudy, who is the interceptor, desires to intercept, delete, add messages, change messages, effectively a bad actor. So we take a look at the diagram here on slide 7, and we see Alice on the right-hand side, and Alice has some data. This could be an email, it could be a note, it could be a web page, a number of elements with that. And she secures this message moving from clear text to ciphertext, transmits it across a channel. Now the channel can be any form of transmission that we can consider. So certainly email direct transfer, file transfer protocol. It could be a text message these days. Back in the Napoleonic period, this would be a letter that a young naval midshipman may carry between Whitehall and other parts of London. So the channel, right, is the transmission mechanism, and within the channel is the data. This is the payload, right? Control messages. Who is it going to? How long is it good for? What's the address of the recipient, Bob in this case? You know, obviously in the internet world, we look at IP addresses, we look at MAC addresses. In the manual world, we think about the Napoleonic era when British intelligence started its ascendancy. This would be a name and a physical mailing address. So physical mailing addresses are manual interpretations of control messages. So Bob receives the message, decodes it, and has the clear text that Alice had sent to him. Trudy has the ability to intercept these messages on the channel, but because of the secure nature of the encryption, the protection for that, cannot read, delete, or alter those messages. So, who could Bob and Alice be? Well, they could be Bob and Alice. There's no reason that it's not real people. But that also could be a client-server relationship, right? Client servers in banking elements, DNS servers communicating with clients during the IP lease phase. Certainly network routers, right, exchanging and information with other routers and updating tables. And there's other examples such as firewalls communicating with security intelligence systems communicating with database protection. So we have a sender and a receiver, many instantiations of that. So on our next slide, 9 right now, the NIST group from the U.S. government, right, has a very vibrant computer security practice, and they have a definition for computer security that's been provided. The protection afforded to an automated information system in order to attain the applicable objectives of preserving the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of information system resources. It includes hardware, software, firmware, information, data, and telecommunications. So, taking a look in reverse order, right, the scope of computer security is the OSI protocol stack that starts with applications on the top, moves down to the presentation and the session, down through the transport layers, down into the physical layers. All of those are within scope of computer security. And you'll notice that it says the protection provided to an automated information system. So this is protection for not only the platforms, the host software, but the information that these systems are processing.
In this video, you will learn to describe why comprehensive cybersecurity architecture can be very complex to implement in reality. Translation of simple business requirements into technical specifications and deployment decisions can be very difficult. The protection mechanism itself is subject to attack. Protectors have to be right all the time. Attackers only have to be right once.
An additional challenge to the security ecosphere has to do with the complexity of the solutions. So the first point about security not as simple as it seems is a huge understatement. Our customers frequently have very simple requirements. For example, one requirement might be that all users will authenticate to the enterprise. Sounds easy enough, but when we start looking at the implementation and the engineering behind a comprehensive access control system with role-based access control, or perhaps attribute-based access control, and privileged users and archiving, right, the solution gets very complicated, even though it's got a very simple high-level requirement. You see this all the time. It is part of the security professional's job description to take these somewhat simple requirements and being able to decompose them into accomplishable or achievable modules for that. An additional complexity for a security architecture is the fact that the solution itself can be attacked. There's the principle of the security enforcement point, or SEP. The security enforcement point is a technical implementation of a business policy. For example, as we were just talking about access control, is that the business security requirement is all users will sign on to the system. The technical implementation of that might be for strong authentication, right? Something you know, something you have. The tracking of privileged or system administrators, right? Somebody can change a security policy. So we have technologies, we have software, and we have hardware, we have firmware that implements or delivers the technical solution to these business security requirements. That's the definition of a security enforcement point. Well, if the salient point is that the adversaries, the attackers, know that to get to the information that they're after, that they need to defeat the protection mechanisms. We need to breach the moat, scale the wall, break the gate, right? So these enforcement structures are just as much a target as the actual data itself. It's a level of complexity that's not found in other technical disciplines, and one that we very much need to be aware of within the security world. And as we pointed out, the protection of this security enforcement structure not can but will complicate the solutions, because you've got this additional layer of protection in terms of protecting the protection mechanisms. Some additional challenges that face the security professional has to do with our security architecture decisions, right? So we talk about logical architectures that describe more what we're doing as opposed to how we're doing it, right? And so then we start getting into the topology of this, of where these enforcement mechanisms will be placed within the architecture. You know, for example, generally we want access control technologies closer to the perimeter, closer to the DMZ. However, some net flow sensors may be more towards the center of the enterprise. So there's some architectural decisions, there's trade space studies, there's trade-offs, there's risks and benefits for these decisions, and it takes a seasoned architect to be able to help define where these deployment decisions will place these technologies. Second point, we talk about key management being very difficult. So when we talk about key management, we're talking about cryptographic keys. You remember the earlier diagram with Alice and Bob, and that Alice would encrypt or protect her message before putting it onto the transmission channel. A cryptographic system uses a key, and there's a corresponding key in Bob's domain for him to decrypt that message. So the key management of the creation of those keys and the distribution of those keys, which we will look at a little later, is a very complicated solution. So something to keep aware of with that. Then there's this larger principle that we as the defenders have to be right all of the time. So the dynamic attacks that are out there that change every day, every week, right? The security architecture needs to be flexible enough to be able to protect against those attacks 100% of the time. So people, places, things, time, and money, all of which are in play in terms of having a dynamic security architecture that protects the information, protects the enforcement points against these constantly changing elements. And they have to be right all of the time. You know, a security architecture that protects 90% of the time is not going to be well embraced by any business. However, the attackers really only need to be right once. in order to succeed. So you see the disparity, the imbalance, the disproportionality of success between attackers and protectors. The business line generally considers security a necessary evil. There's a principle about the seatbelt philosophy. A seatbelt costs about $200 to put into a vehicle, but that 1/2 second before a serious automobile accident, that seatbelt is worth more than $1 million. Security constructs are exactly the same thing. The business lines frequently considered to be security in the way. It is incumbent upon us as security professionals to ensure that the security constructs are actually enablers, right? So that we make it easier to conduct business in a complex world. Our last set of challenges, and of course these are fairly high level, but can be decomposed into additional challenges. Talk about the constant effort, the afterthought for security, and that security is frequently viewed as a obstacle. So somewhat in reverse order, that the business lines within a enterprise frequently view security as an obstacle, as a barrier. This is something that is a necessary evil, and we need to operate, and just do our best to get. Sometimes and that encourages, by the way, people to try to do end runs around security. Security professionals' responsibility is to make security an enabler. Right, so make it a positive value. This helps us do business in a very complex and very threatening world. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So why is security sometimes viewed as an obstacle? Is the fact that it's not integrated early into the life cycle, development life cycle, or system life cycle development for the project. So we look at life cycle models such as our RUP model or iterative engineering, and you don't see security in the functional definition. So the security professional needs to convince the project leaders that this is the least expensive way to integrate security into the approaches to be included earlier. So that way you'll have application developers, infrastructure, our security people there, test engineers, QA. All of those have a place early in the table. The top point about security architectures requiring constant effort speaks to the dynamic nature of our attacks, that the adversaries are constantly introducing new attack profiles, new vulnerabilities are released from our software manufacturers that are turned into exploits. Just the war changes, and it changes every week. So constantly, our defense mechanisms, our security architectures also need to be very mobile, very agile to adapt and to change to these changing attacks. Otherwise, we'll be very much like we were back in the 1990s with very static castle, moat, drawbridge type of security architectures.
In this video, you will learn to describe the foundations of critical thinking and why it is an essential skill for any career in cybersecurity.
So a little bit of background, my name is Kristen Dahl. I'm an intelligence developer with X-Force Iris. I've been with IBM for about 9 months now, and prior to that I was a research staff at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. This talk, Beyond Technology, this was a talk that I put together a few months back for a conference here in Boston called Day of Security. It's a conference geared toward women in cybersecurity. And what I wanted to do, and this is geared toward women who are early on in their career, what I wanted to do was highlight critical thinking as an important part of cybersecurity. So often when we think of cybersecurity, our immediate thought is it's a very technical field. We think our thoughts automatically go to operating systems, networking, very technical things. And I think that our minds, our ability to think through problems and think critically through problems is often overlooked. And so that's what I'm trying to present with this talk. So what is critical thinking? It's one of those things that doesn't have a hard and fast definition. You know, everybody's got their own definition of what is critical thinking. And I went through, I did some research, and I found a few definitions, and then I made up my own that I liked, that I put at the bottom. And so for the purposes of this discussion, critical thinking is controlled, purposeful thinking directed toward a goal. You know, it's different than daydreaming. It's different than thinking about what you had for breakfast or your to-do list. It's very controlled, purposeful thinking. And again, my goal with this presentation is to present the basic foundations of critical thinking, and also to highlight this as an essential skill for any career in the cybersecurity domain, whether you're in finance, whether you're in HR, whether you're legal, whether you have a technical role. I think you'll take something away from this, and these skills will apply, you know, regardless of, you know, your role or the project that you're on. So why in cybersecurity? Why am I focusing on critical thinking specifically in cybersecurity? Besides the fact that I work in cybersecurity, there's a number of characteristics of the domain that I think lend itself to, you know, this kind of discussion. And one is that, you know, it's a constantly changing environment. You know, it's very fast-paced. We've got different technology that's changing, you know, every day. There's multiple stakeholders, you know, that come from a variety of backgrounds, whether that's economic, legal, HR, and we've also got an adversary. There's an adversary presence in there. So it's very multifaceted. It's a new field, too. It's a relatively new field, and we don't have all the answers. You know, we don't have cyber figured out. And so critical thinking skills, these force us to think and act in ways, in situations where there are no clear answers and where there are no specific procedures in place. And this, again, this is part art, part science. There's no defined way to do this. It's subjective, it's impossible to measure, but I think it's still important that we talk about it and have, you know, these discussions. And one other point I like to bring up a lot is that, you know, we live in this age of Google it, where, you know, often our knee-jerk reaction when we're faced with a problem is to use Google, you know, is to enter, you know, our question into our search box, and, you know, the internet tells us the answer. And that's different from the situation in which, you know, we had to rely on books and libraries and slower research methods to, you know, answer our questions. Information was not as widely available. And so this wealth of information isn't always good. You know, more data doesn't always equal more knowledge, and it can quickly start to overwhelm our reasoning abilities. And then because of this, critical thinking is more important now than ever. You know, the ability to discern important information from, you know, a vast sea of information and make educated, intelligent decisions.
In this video, you will learn to describe why the rapidly changing technology and tools of cybersecurity make critical thinking skills essential. Describe the critical thinking model as the intersection of critical thinking characteristics, technical skills, interpersonal skills, theoretical and experimental knowledge, and intellectual skills.
I like to start off with a thought experiment that kind of shines a spotlight on what I mean by critical thinking. So let's thought experiment. Pretend that you are an office manager in a high-rise building downtown, and you know, you've got multiple tenants. You've got retail, apartments, office space, you know, and you've been getting a lot of complaints that the elevators are slow. You're getting emails, you're getting phone calls. People are upset. The elevators are too slow, and they're threatening to break their lease. And you don't want that. You don't want people to break their leases. So what do? How do you solve this problem? Now, there's a number of different approaches. You could, you know, replace the lift. You could take a software approach and update the lift algorithm. You could tell them to take the stairs. You could install more elevators. You could do nothing. You know, there's a number of different approaches and solutions to this problem. And I want you to be thinking about this over the course of this discussion, over the course of this presentation, because we're going to come back to it. But think about how you would solve this problem, and think about how you came to that conclusion. And then again, we'll come back to that at the end of this discussion. So with that, let's get into it. Now, when we think about skills, the sought-after skills in cybersecurity, we immediately go to the technical skills. Now, these are, I did an informal survey of, some big tech companies, what they were hiring for in cybersecurity, and I looked at IBM, I looked at Microsoft, Facebook, Google, the big tech companies, and I saw a lot of what really jumped out at me were these technical job skills. So operating systems, intrusion detection, reverse engineering, all very important. And with that comes a slew of supporting tools to help support these activities. So, whether that's Wireshark or Splunk or, a number of different, database tools to help support these activities. Now you've got a conundrum where you've got hundreds and hundreds of tools that are, updated regularly. Everybody's got a favorite. They have got different data formats. They don't always play nice. This can be messy to deal with. It can also be impossible to keep up with. It's impossible to become proficient in all these tools. And so this is what I mean when I say, this common misconception is keeping up with these latest technical tools and trends is the key to success. But the reality is that they're always going to be changing. The technology is constantly changing. Our adversary is always changing. But the good news is that the security and design fundamentals change slowly. TCP/IP, operating systems, kernel fundamentals, those change slowly. And so critical thinking, combining these critical thinking skills with an understanding of security fundamentals will allow us to identify solutions to unknown, undefined, complex problems, situations, regardless of technology, regardless of the tool that we have in front of us. So I did some more, thinking about critical thinking, and I was wondering, what differentiates, somebody, a good critical thinker from a not so good critical thinker? What are the characteristics that enable critical thinking? And I did some research. I really couldn't find anything that was specific to cybersecurity. But where this has been studied a lot is in healthcare. So, if you think about healthcare, you think about an emergency room. You've got doctors and nurses who are in a high stress situation. They have to make sometimes life-saving decisions, in just a matter of minutes, just based on incomplete data. And so, the ability to think critically, to pull together a decision, an intelligent decision in just that short amount of time is very important. And so critical thinking has been studied a lot in this field. And so this model on the slide was actually pulled from a healthcare textbook. I really like this model, and I think these same principles still apply to cybersecurity. And so I'll just briefly walk us through each of these characteristics. So at the top, in that top circle, are your critical thinking characteristics, your attitudes and behaviors as a person. This is your personality, your outlook on the world, how you approach problems. It's going to be, a product of your upbringing, your life experiences, your job experiences. It's going to be different for each of us. And that's good. That's good because this is a field where we want that diversity. We want that diversity of perception. If there's one thing that I've seen in my career, that I've seen in cybersecurity in particular, is that the most successful people are often the most curious. They're the most curious about the world. They've got a constant hunger to keep learning, to keep growing, to solve problems, to, if they're on a threat hunt or they're doing some kind of investigative work, they've got this intrinsic desire to get to the answer, to, find a solution. And so just that curiosity will take you far. Going clockwise, the next characteristic is your theoretical and experiential knowledge. So now this is like the fundamental knowledge that you pick up, maybe in school about how operating systems work, your experience, your knowledge that comes from, on the job, the different projects that you've been on, what you've learned from those projects, your intellectual skills. That's what that circle represents. Moving on, your interpersonal skills. How well do you interact with other people? To what degree are you interacting with your coworkers, with your peers? Are you asking questions? Are you offering, your own input? Because cybersecurity is not a solo profession. I rely on my colleagues every single day. Whether we're sharing information or I've got questions or need help, I'm relying on other researchers that are out, within the company, that are out external to IBM, maybe that are in a different domain. So how well can you work together with others and share information? And then last is the technical skills and competencies. So these are, your ability to use Wireshark, your ability to triage, maybe Suricata alerts. These are the technical skills and competencies that were outlined on that skill slide. Intrusion detection, reverse engineering. That's what these skills are. And in this model, their overlap represents, a person's critical thinking ability.
In this video, you will learn to describe the 5 key skills of critical thinking, challenge assumptions, consider alternatives, evaluate data, identify key drivers, understand context.
5 skills. So now, how do you, practice these skills? How do you actually apply these in your everyday life, on your job? How can you grow these and become a better critical thinker? And so these skills, these are not my skills. These came from a woman that I worked with at a previous job firm. And these 5 skills came out of her time, studying psychology and studying, how humans, make decisions. And so for each of these skills, on the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the skills, explain, what they mean, provide some additional work that examines, how can that be applied to cybersecurity, and how can you actually exercise this. So we'll start with challenging our assumptions. This sounds easy, but it's hard in practice. It requires questioning your mental model, questioning the mental model that underlies your reasoning. How do you do that? Because assumptions, oftentimes we're not even aware that we're making them. They're based on, our past experiences, thoughts and evidence, our personality. So oftentimes we don't even know that we're making an assumption. What I found is that it's very useful to bring in other perspectives, to talk to other people and start brainstorming and listing out your assumptions, and to continually do this, throughout the lifespan of your project, throughout the project timeline. Question your assumptions, gather more data, take a systematic, disciplined approach to this. And so what I usually do is I try to make a framework out of this. I try to put this into steps that are, distill how you would do this. And so step 1 is, explicitly list all assumptions. And again, this requires other people. Invite all of the stakeholders involved, whether, it's your project manager, colleagues, whoever. Have a brainstorming session where you start to list like every possible assumption you could be having. And then for each of those assumptions, question them, examine them with some key questions. Why do I think this is correct? When could this be untrue? How confident am I that it's valid? What's my confidence level? And if it's invalid, what would the impact be? This gives you a way to start to triage your assumptions, and then now you can categorize them based on evidence. Is it a solid and well-supported assumption? Is it correct with caveats? Or is it unsupported or questionable? Unsupported and questionable doesn't necessarily mean wrong. It just means you need more data. And so after you go through this categorization, you refine, you remove, you collect additional data as needed, and you iterate over this. This happens naturally throughout the lifespan of your project. And so that is your key assumptions check. Number 2, so now we've checked our assumptions. Are there alternative explanations. Are there alternative explanations for behavior, for an activity? Like I said, our brains can piece together a situation with just a few bits of data, but the scary thing is that, if we fail to consider missing data or alternatives, this can lead us down the wrong path. We have to be able to consider alternative explanations. Avoid letting yourself become entrenched in one explanation. I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me, where I've become so engrossed in one explanation that it turns out to be wrong because I fail to consider alternative explanations. And so, again, how do you do this? Brainstorming, get more people in the room, start, you need those different perspectives, because you need different perspectives of looking at the problem and different creative thought processes. I like to use the 6 classic journalistic questions as a framework for this, which I'll talk about on the next slide, to evaluate all different dimensions, and then also consider the null hypothesis. This is the exact opposite of what your main hypothesis is, and this is a good exercise because sometimes it forces you to look at a problem from a different perspective. So the 6 W's, again, they're very simple. We all know these: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I find that they're very useful for examining explanations or examining these alternative explanations. So in the case of, I like to use a threat hunt example. Who is involved? Who is the victim? Who is the target? Who are the stakeholders? Who's affected by the outcome of this? What is at stake, whether it's data, whether it's a physical asset, what happened, what is the problem, what's the desired outcome of this? Where did this take place? Does geography matter? Where is the infrastructure? Where is the victim? Where is the adversary? Does this matter? And again, when? Does timing matter? Are there key dates? Are there deadlines that we need to be aware of? And why are we doing this? Ask yourself that. Make sure you're solving the right problem. Also, what are the key drivers? What could be a motive? And how? How are we approaching this? Is it feasible? And then be detailed and specific. Really think through, how you're going to, think through each alternative and what that would entail and whether that's plausible. So again, examine alternative explanations. Look at them through the lens of these 6 different questions to characterize each explanation and examine it from different dimensions. So we've identified our assumptions, we've evaluated alternative explanations. Now we get to evaluate our data. This is one of my favorite skills. This is the crux of the scientific method. Assess the data against multiple hypotheses to see how well it fits. If you've got a favorite hypothesis but the data doesn't fit, then you unfortunately have to let go of that hypothesis. And there's a few there's a couple of points I like to make on this slide that aren't necessarily related directly to critical thinking, but I still think are very important to make. And the first, I'm going to start on the bottom. The first is that cyber data is notoriously hard to get, and oftentimes people don't realize that until they need the data. And this can be for a number of reasons, whether it's policy, privacy issues, maybe HIPAA, GDPR, maybe there are reasons that, your customer, your client, or whoever, you can't get the data. It could be that it's not been collected. If your network is not instrumented to collect certain data, or your host systems aren't instrumented to collect certain logs, the data doesn't exist, and then you can't do anything. So what I like to tell people is to be proactive. Be proactive when you're setting up a new network environment, a new system. Establish a baseline for what's normal. Understand, what's important on your network and what data you would need to capture in order to, triage problems or to, monitor its health and wellness. And so the nice thing about this too is that it helps you establish a baseline for what's normal. It helps you to see, what does normal source and destination web traffic look like? What does normal endpoint activity look like? this allows you to, this is key to anomaly detection. This is how you'll be on the lookout too for inconsistent data. So again, evaluating data. If the data is not there, it's not there. Be proactive. Be proactive in establishing good data collection practices. And skill number 4, so identifying key drivers. So again, key drivers are things that can significantly impact a situation, and they're not always technical in nature. So think about things if you're, from a cybersecurity perspective, these obviously do include technology, so encryption, authentication, tools, frameworks, infrastructure availability, but they also include things like regulatory and political drivers, so privacy, GDPR, safety regulations, intellectual property, supply chain, logistics issues, your employees themselves, their training needs, their perspectives, their skills, and then your threat actors. We always have that adversary, that other person. What are their technical capabilities? What are their motives? What are their opportunities? So a nation state threat actor is going to have a lot more, financial capability and perhaps different motives than a script kiddie or somebody who's hacking at your server from a basement somewhere. So there are a number of different drivers that can impact your situation that it's important to be aware of because they're not always technical. And number 5, understanding context. So what does this mean? Context is the operational environment in which you are working. And so the context here at IBM is different than the context at a university, which is different than a context perhaps at another, at a Microsoft or another company. And so context matters. Be aware of, different perspectives of your managers, your colleagues, your clients. Ask yourself these questions. What do they need from me? How can I frame the issue? Do I need to place their questions in a broader context? And this is where the notion of framing techniques comes into play. So you recall at the beginning of the presentation when I outlined the goal of this talk and also what I mean by critical thinking, that was a framing technique to ensure that we are all on the same page and to understand that we're all using the same vocabulary, because this helps to avoid confusion and avoid problems down the line. So I love framing techniques as just a solution to mitigate problems down the line. So framing the issue, again, there's a number of steps that you can do to help you look at an issue or a situation more objectively. And the first is to identify the key components inherent in whatever the situation is. So what does this mean? Who or what are the key components? You break them down into component parts and start listing your key actors, key categories, and then from there start to identify the different factors at play. You understand the components. What are the driving forces? And again, this will allow you, going back to that driving forces diagram, to start revealing additional insights and relationships that you might not have been aware of initially. Now you can start to look at relationships. What patterns and relationships exist among different components and factors? Are they static? Are they dynamic? In the case of, maybe doing a threat hunt investigation, often graphing databases may help here to help start to visualize different relationships among entities. And similarities and differences. Are there historical analogies that you can fall back on? Have you seen, similar patterns, behaviors, or a situation, in a different context or in a different experience? Can you pull from that? And then redefining. Experiment with different ways to reframe your problem. Write down what you know, what you don't know. How can you look at it differently? Is there a root cause, perhaps, that you're not seeing? And so, going back to our elevator problem, Again, just to remind us, we're managers of a high-rise apartment complex. You know, people are complaining that the elevators are too slow, and we've got a number of different approaches to fixing this problem. You know, I'm sure all of you came up with your own approach. You have your own thought process. This is a real anecdote. This is a real situation that happened, and what they ended up doing was installing mirrors. They installed mirrors, and the complaints died. All of a sudden, the elevators were faster. And this is a classic example of problem framing, and how you can, by changing the problem space, now you're fundamentally changing the solution space. By installing mirrors, the problem wasn't that the elevator was too slow. The real problem that people are complaining about was that waiting is boring. It was boring to stand there and wait because, you know, that their minds weren't focused. They were focused on the waiting. By installing mirrors, now all of a sudden, people who are waiting for the elevator are distracted. They can look at themselves. They can look at other people. You know, they're not focused on the elevator. So rather than making the elevator faster, the solution space is transferred into shorten the perceived wait time. And that can be done a lot more simply and cheaply by putting up mirrors, playing music, installing art displays, things like that. So this is an example of this notion of problem framing and how identifying these different aspects of a problem can deliver like these radical improvements in spark solutions to a seemingly intractable problem. And again, this is why having that diversity of perception or of thought within cybersecurity is so important. So again, just to recap the 5 skills that I've outlined here: challenge your assumptions, refine as you learn more, consider alternative explanations, don't get entrenched in one explanation, evaluate data. Again, does the data fit your hypothesis? Identify the key drivers. What are the driving forces at play? Remembering that they're not always technical. They might be political. There might be personnel issues. There could be a number of driving forces, and understand the context. Understand the context in which you are working. Can you put yourself in other people's shoes? Can you reframe the problem so that the solution space is different?